Welcome to the Lord of the Rings Lorecast, the show that explores the background of Tolkien's amazing world from the very beginning. So here's a question for you. What do these words have in common? Rightabouts, wagon spelled with an extra G, worriting, and Gorhendad. I'm probably butchering that one. What do these all have in common? Well, they all show up in this section of the story that we're reading this week, and they're also either foreign words or old-timey words or just kind of odd, and we're going to be going into the details about each of these as we get through another section of the Fellowship of the Ring, which is not in the movie. We get some more fun moments with Farmer Maggot, and Merry shows back up. Yep, now we actually have the four hobbits, the four main hobbits together. And if you recall from last week, the hobbits are now preparing to get to the ferry. They're worried about the riders, the Black Riders, the Nazgul coming after them. They don't know how many there are yet, and Frodo is very concerned about this next stage of the journey. So we're going to wrap up chapter 4, A Shortcut to Mushrooms. But because the rest of this chapter is so short, we will be beginning A Conspiracy Unmasked, where we will get a little bit of a look at Buckland before we have to end the episode and move on to next week. Oh, and by the way, speaking of future things coming up, we are getting close to the end of the month. And that means if you are a VIP patron, then you are welcome to join us for the VIP patron chat coming up on the 30th. And if you're not a VIP patron, there's still time to sign up and join us this month if you would like to. We'll discuss whatever you all would like to discuss, and the plan is to do it a little bit earlier on that Sunday so that some of our international friends will be able to join in and it won't be the middle of the night for you. So I'll be posting more stuff on the Patreon for that, for those of you who are interested. But here, let's get into this section of the end of A Shortcut to Mushrooms. Now, although this section of the story in the book isn't directly shown in the movie version, in fact, there are significant differences from this part of the story moving forward through the Old Forest until they get out of the Old Forest. But in this section, the tone of the story is actually very similar to the tone of the movies, even though the events are different. And if you are more familiar with the films than you are the book, then keep this in mind, that although we don't already have the four hobbits together, they're not frantically running through the night in order to get to the ferry and then just barely making it on and getting across the water. Things work out differently here, but the tone, the feeling of being scared, going out into the night, worried about every little sound and every little thing they see around the corner. And on top of it, and we'll get into this, the misconceptions they have when they do come across somebody in the dark are very horror themed in a way, inspired maybe, which is another interesting point because think about the nature of horror movies or horror books when it came to the time period in which this was being written. Now, yes, we absolutely had horror and some other types of similar genres in writing at this time. Heck, even things like Edgar Allan Poe were already very popular. But when you realize that Peter Jackson's movies before he worked on the Lord of the Rings were horror movies, and then you incorporate the tension that you get in these types of moments, you can see that that pairing actually works really well. And I know a lot of people in the late 90s were kind of skeptical because Jackson was basically a no-name director. And the combination of that and somebody who had experience with horror films confused a lot of the fan base at first. But I think in retrospect, going through these sections of the story and the ones that show up much later, I mean, think about the moments with Shelob or heck, even going back to The Hobbit and Frodo getting lost inside the cave and having to deal with Gollum. Tolkien had a darker, more, I guess, horror kind of side to a lot of his imaginations. And again, when you think back to his influences, there is a lot of scary and spooky stuff in mythology across all of humanity. So it all makes sense. It all comes back together. But here, let's get into this section because they decide to leave. And remember, Farmer Maggot has said that he will take them to the ferry by cart. And that may or may not. I said it's probably faster in the previous episode. I guess it depends on how fast the horses go or how quiet they're being with the clopping of the horses. But it is more secure to be in a group together. And as we will see, there's a place for Frodo to hide. And also, they've been walking through the wilderness for a few days now, so I would assume that riding in a cart feels a lot more comfortable to them with their sore muscles and that sort of thing. But we're told that there's 5 miles from Maggot's property to the ferry. So they just have to make it 5 miles. And in today's world, 5 miles in a car or on a train, on a bus, something like that isn't very far to go. But at the speed of walking or on a horse, there's still a considerable amount of time. And the sun is going down. So already we have some of these horror elements. The hobbits wrapped themselves up, but their ears were strained for any sound above the creak of the wheels and the slow clop of the pony's hooves. Already you can picture this. You can imagine being in this situation. And I'm sure wrapping themselves up was both for warmth, but also there was a sense of comfort in just being kind of snuggled up and kind of frightened in that moment. And we get a number of moments where we can see that their perception of what is going on is being influenced by their emotional state. The wagon seemed slower than a snail to Frodo, for example. He's wishing that he was already at the ferry and already in Buckland where he would feel much safer. And we get this juxtaposed with Pippin and Sam and their personalities and the amount of information that they have. Frodo knows how terrifying it would be to be captured by the enemy. Pippin doesn't really have a clue about this yet, and he's nodding towards sleep, and Sam is staring forwards into the rising fog. I get a sense that he's looking protectively in the distance, trying to see if he can make out anything on the road in order to keep his master safe, basically. And it doesn't take long until something happens, and we still have this spooky kind of sounds and descriptions here. The wagon creaked to a halt. They were just beginning to scramble out when suddenly they heard what they had all been dreading: hoofs on the road ahead. Now they're at the ferry lane entrance, the lane to the ferry, the last bit of road. But there's something or someone coming up. They hear the clip-clop of hooves on the ground. And who's the first to speak up? Sam. He anxiously tells Frodo to get down in the wagon and cover up with blankets. It's not Frodo's idea, it's Sam's idea. And then he says this: "We'll send this rider to the rightabouts." And I stopped when I read that and I was like, rightabouts? That's an interesting phrase. This is not something that comes up, at least in my conversations with people around me. So I had to look it up. And it comes from military language, turning 180 degrees, right about face, to turn and march the other direction, that sort of thing. And so you can see, of course, Tolkien's military past coming through with this. But I have to wonder, was this a phrase, or is it a phrase that is still used in, I don't know, the UK or other parts of the world that just isn't something we say here in the States? And we're told that Sam thinks that the Black Riders would have to ride over him to get near the wagon. And he's starting to be more brave about this. Remember, he was very scared by the dogs, but he's ready to jump to action if he sees a Black Rider out there. And then Farmer Maggot speaks up. He's the first one to call out to whoever this rider is. "Hello there," with an A. Old-timey stuff. Oh, and by the way, wagon twice in this section is spelled with that extra G, and it's an old-timey spelling of the word. Eventually, the second G was removed, which is odd because by traditional standards of English, that would mean that we would pronounce it wagon because there's only one vowel or one consonant between the two vowels. So kind of funny. But he says, "Hello there," and the hooves stop short. And we get some more examples of how brave Farmer Maggot is. "Now then," said the farmer, throwing the reins to Sam and striding forward, "don't you come a step nearer. What do you want, and where are you going?" And we have one of those horror moments, the type of horror moment that Jackson uses in the films. especially in moments where, for example, Gandalf the White shows up for the first time, but they think he might be Saruman, and so they perceive him as being kind of this combination of the two because their perceptions are influencing their mental state, their emotions are influencing what they're seeing. That's why Jackson did that. It wasn't just to trick the audience. You have moments like that right here. "I want Mr. Baggins. Have you seen him?" said a muffled voice. But the voice was the voice of Mary Brandybuck. We're getting exactly that type of moment where, as we read through this section, our anticipation also as the readers is that we're going to hear something like a Nazgul say, "I want Mr. Baggins. Have you seen him?" In his raspy, quiet, whispery voice. And it's muffled, which means that first we're like, uh-oh, this is one of the Black Riders. But no, we're immediately told then that it's Mary Brandybuck, kind of like Gandalf coming out of that moment. And we're seeing his face and his voice is now fully Ian McKellen's. It's no longer Saruman. And they cry, "Mr. Merry." And he says, "Of course. What did you think it was?" Like he doesn't know what's going on. This is one of those great moments. And the description is perfect. "He came out of the mist and their fears subsided. He seemed suddenly to diminish to ordinary hobbit size. So even their visual perception was seeing something that wasn't true because they expected it to be worse than it was." And we also get an interesting description of Merry here, and maybe one of you can fill me in on this because I'm not sure exactly what this means. He's explained as riding a pony, and his scarf was swathed round his neck. Of course, wrapped around his neck. That's what that means. Another old-timey word, by the way. "And over his chin to keep out the fog." Now, I've been out in the world in the fog. I've never felt the need to wrap my chin to keep the fog out. I'm not sure exactly what that means. Maybe it gets damp and wet, and so it makes your face cold. Something like that. Not exactly sure, but also I live in Florida. So it does get cold here at times, but very briefly, and it doesn't stay below freezing for more than a day or two. So, and it's supposed to be kind of warm. So I'm not really sure, although night can get colder. That's a thing. But Frodo is extremely excited to see that this is Merry, and of course, not a Black Rider. And Merry speaks out and says that basically he was wondering where they've been. They seem to be taking longer than he expected. And he decided that he would head out into the night in order to see if he could find them and if they had fallen in any ditches. Then he says, "But I'm blessed, B-L-E-S-T, another old-timey thing. Today is much more common to see blessed spelled B-L-E-S-S-E-D, either most commonly pronounced as one syllable, blessed, or two syllables, often heard in songs like hymns and things like that, blessed. But this B-L-E-S-T form is older and still shows up in old songs like hymns and traditional songs and things like that when you see them written out. So it is still around, sort of, but much less common. And then we get a little glimpse into Merry's personality. He's saying that he wasn't sure which way they would come. And then he asks Farmer Maggot, "Where did you find them? In your duck pond?" Which is a funny idea. It's a funny thought, like, oh, they somehow ended up in his duck pond on his property. But Merry's not that far off. He did find them on his property. To which Farmer Maggot says, no, they were trespassing. And then Tolkien spares us the details because we don't have to hear back about the story that we just read, because Farmer Maggot says that he'll tell him the story at some point, no doubt, but that it is time for him to get going because Mrs. Maggot will be worreting with the night getting thick. Two different things to talk about here. Worreting. And this one's easy to miss because if you're just reading through the passage, you might even just read it as worrying. And at first I had to stop and go, wait a minute, I hadn't noticed that word, that spelling of the word worreting. What does that even mean? And it turns out that it is also an old dialect form of worrying, which is basically means the same thing, fretting, being concerned. And he specifically says here, with the night getting thick, which is another one of those phrases that, I don't know, maybe my part of the world, we don't use phrases like night getting thick, but it does seem to imply not just the fog, that's clearly something going on, but the impending darkness. The night is getting darker and foggier. It is thick with both. And then Farmer Maggot heads off, and he gives them a goodbye, talks about how the day has been weird. We get another weird spelling of the word wagon. And then he also says that it's been a good day and all's well that ends well. That's one of those old-timey phrases, but we still hear every so often. But then we get a sense that like he is being brave because he's genuinely a little bit concerned for his own well-being. He says, I'll not deny that I'll be glad now when I do get back to his own doors, his own home. So he's not without fear, which means that this is legitimate bravery. You can't be brave if you're not afraid. You just are acting naturally. And then we get one more little glimpse of how kind and caring both of the maggots are, which is a weird word to say in that phrase. But he gives them a large basket from under the seat. He was kind of hiding down there. And he says, I nearly forgot. Mrs. Maggot put this up for Mr. Baggins with her compliments. What nice people. Just gifts and extra food and things for them to have along with their journey. Even though they don't have the full story, they trust that these are good people and they're being nice to them. And again, it's these little things, these little glimpses of hope, these little kindnesses that fight back the darkness. And we are seeing it be delivered by a character who we just met. And we will see Gandalf talk about this. This comes up in the story. And yes, there are the big moments where you raise your sword and charge into battle in order to push back the enemy. But it's really these little moments that build the bravery, that build the morale, that keep people moving forward in the hardest times. This is clearly something that Tolkien is aware of because of his life and the things that he went through, and probably something that we need to be reminded of more today. People are people, and in everyone's lifetime, there are hard times. And my point is, Tolkien knew that that's the way the world was. And the way you get through your personal hard times, which feel as bad to you as anybody else, is through kindness, basic kindness and hope. And that is on display here from the very earliest parts of this story. But notice that it's also mixed with misconceptions. We just read a section of the story where Farmer Maggot was suspicious of the people over in Hobbiton, and Sam was suspicious of people outside of Hobbiton. They still have their flaws, they still have their prejudices, but deep down, they're good people and they're just doing the best they can. You know, these are real people. That's the way this feels. It's so well done. And you can see in this moment that it makes a difference to Frodo. This chapter wraps up with these sentences right here. They watched the pale rings of light round his lanterns as they dwindled into the foggy night. Suddenly, Frodo laughed. He's been so concerned. From the covered basket he held, the scent of mushrooms was rising. Shortcut to mushrooms. And then we begin chapter 5, A Conspiracy Unmasked. And we get more interactions here with Merry in this section. We start to really get a sense of what Buckland is all about and who Merry is more. And we get a real sense of the four hobbits now together. But before all that, we have to have a quick little conversation with Merry and then some descriptions about what's going on in Buckland. And Merry is clearly picking up on some things going on here. He says, now we had better get ourselves home. There's something funny about all this, I see, but it must wait till we get in. Which is wise. Let's not slow down and talk about this. Let's go to a place where we're safe, because clearly something weird is going on. They head down Ferry Lane. They get to the ferry. We get these descriptions of the wooden landing where the ferry is. The white bollards, bollards, bollards being these large vertical posts that you would use for mooring. You would use for wrapping your ropes or whatever around boats to keep them from floating away. They also might be used to hold up parts of the dock. It's part of the design. It's an interesting word, bollards, another word that we don't come across very much. And we get descriptions of the fog in this kind of spooky way. The mists in the flat fields were now higher. They were up above the hedges. And the water is described as black with these curling wisps of steam along near the reeds of the bank. And if you've ever been in one of these situations at night, it can look beautiful, but it also can feel kind of creepy. And in a subtle way, Tolkien is describing that they're moving from a place of less safety to a place that's more safe, because he describes the fog as less on the further side of the river. We get descriptions as they push off. They put their pony on the ferry. They push off. The water is flowing slowly. The steep bank on the other side is coming up in front of them. And then we start getting descriptions of the home of the Brandybucks. Lamps were twinkling there. Behind loomed up the Buck Hill, and out of it, through stray shrouds of mist, shone many round windows, yellow and red. Interesting that it's yellow and red. I'm guessing that's firelight, both yellow and reddish firelight. They were the windows of Brandy Hall, the ancient home of the Brandybucks. And we're given this little history at the beginning of this chapter about this location and some of their ancestry. And by the way, we'll be digging into the ancestry of Pippin and Merry on some of the bonus episodes coming up. I think we're going to probably tackle Pippin first, since he's been with the group longer than Merry has, now that Merry's starting to join them here. But we're told some basic details. Gorhendad Oldbuck, the founder of the family, of the Oldbuck family, one of the oldest in the Marish, or indeed the Shire, had crossed the river, which was originally the boundary of the lands eastward. Gorhendad. What an awesome name. This is a Welsh word that is translated to great grandfather or ancestor. His name literally means great grandfather Oldbuck. Like, really old guy is his description. Really old guy went and founded this land, and he builds Brandy Hall, and he changes his name from Oldbuck, which seems like one of those weird names, like somebody being named Grandma or something like that in the real world. But you have to imagine them having been a child with the name Grandma. Even the last name Oldbuck, it's like, well, I guess you have an old family. But at what point did you just go from Buck to Oldbuck? And it does seem like a good idea to change it to something like Brandybuck, which is a lot nicer than just Oldbuck. And Tolkien tells us that he became the master of what was virtually, in his words, virtually a small independent country. And his family grew and grew and grew, eventually becoming this extremely large family. And I've gone back and looked at the ancestry preparing for the bonus episode this week, and there is some interesting stuff. For example, Gorhendad lived way, way, way back. So Shire reckoning 740, Third Age 2340, and Gerontius Took lived 400 years later. Now, Gerontius's daughter, Mirabella Took, married Gorhendad's direct descendant, Gorbodoc Brandybuck. So this is a connection to the Took family, which eventually we get Pippin. And through other interconnected marriages between the Brandybucks and the Tooks, you'll also get Merry on that side of the tree. But if you look at the lineage, it's kind of crazy, because Mirabella Took is the 11th of 12 children of Gerontius the Old Took and Adamanta Chubb. Such great names. And if Mirabella Took is familiar to you, it's because Mirabella and Gorbodoc have Primula Brandybuck, a child, and 6 other children. And Primula might be familiar because Primula, Brandybuck, and Drogo Baggins marry and have Frodo Baggins. So Frodo, Merry, and Pippin can all trace their ancestry all the way back up to Gerontius the Old Took. So when you trace back the ancestry from Frodo or Merry or Pippin, you find all of these connections between the Tooks, the Brandybucks, and the Bagginses in a few different places. It's fairly complex, but you can see that they're all related, and they're all connected to the Brandybuck history in some form or another through intermarriage or direct lineage. But getting back to Brandy Hall, we're told that it occupied the whole of the low hill. It's kind of up on this hill, and had 3 large front doors, many side doors, and about 100 windows. This was a large manor. And for the first time, we get a real sense of the difference between the common hobbits and somebody like Frodo and Bilbo in their fairly large, but larger than average, but still normalish sized hole, compared to a manor with 100 windows and 3 front doors. We get a real sense that the Brandybucks and the Tooks, and I know my pronunciation of Took isn't super consistent. It's got that ooh in it, but I always want to say Took, and I'm sure that slips in. But we get a sense that the Brandybucks and the Tooks are absolutely of a different status, a different social status, a different social class. And this gives us another perspective on why the more regular or average or I don't know, working class, maybe that's the best way to say it, hobbits of the world and people from different areas view people from this part of the Shire as being different. They are different. And we get even more descriptions in this section of the text. We're told, though, as a matter of fact, they were not very different from the other hobbits of the Four Farthings, except in one point. They were fond of boats, and some of them could swim. And clearly, some of them came from a different caste than a lot of other people. It's making that point, but then also that they like boats and they can swim. That's weird, right? We know that most of the hobbits don't like boats. They're afraid of the water and they can't swim. And there's a part of this that I have to wonder, how much is that in common with people in Tolkien's life back in his lifetime? I grew up, I've mentioned this before, I grew up in Florida. We learned to swim at a young age because there's a lot of water around. It's one of those safety things. Parents specifically will train their children if they have a pool, or will take their children to a community pool or get lessons, because in the event that they fall into the water, which is very common, we have lots of lakes, there's coastlines, there's pools everywhere. They want to hang out with their friends and go swimming. They need to be safe. They need to know how to swim. But I know that's not so common in other parts of the world, especially colder parts of the world where the water is always cold and you don't really want to go swimming very often. This feels like another one of those parallels to like Tolkien's life. But then we get this other little detail here about the high hay, this hedge. Their land was originally unprotected from the east to the very borders of the Shire. But on that side, they built a hedge. The high hay, it had been planted many generations ago and was now thick and tall, for it was constantly tended. It ran all the way from Brandywine Bridge in a big loop curving away from the river to Haysend, where the Withilwindle flowed out of the forest into the Brandywine, well over 20 miles from end to end. This was their boundary. This was their protective border for this part of the world, not just to outsiders, because hobbits are careful about outsiders, but the old forest itself. We are getting foreshadowing about the old forest here. But of course, it was not a complete protection. The forest drew close to the hedge in many places. And notice the active verb placed on the forest. The forest drew close. Now, we might think, well, that's what plants do. They grow, they plant new plants, and over time they can grow and draw closer to other things on property because that's what plants do. But we're getting foreshadowing that this isn't a regular forest. And then this section ends with this. The Bucklanders kept the doors locked after dark, and that also was not usual in the Shire. I hope you're having as much fun as I am going through all of these funny old words and the different story bits that are different from the movie and the books. It's a lot of fun for me. I hope you're having a blast. And it seems like some of you are, because we've had a number of new people sign up for the Patreon recently. And quick reminder, again, the VIP patron chat coming up on the 30th, and you are welcome to join us. I would love to get as many of you who would like to get together and just have a fun conversation, nerd out about things, whatever you guys want to talk about. This is for you. And I guess it's for me a little bit too, because I like meeting everybody and finding out your thoughts on things and getting your perspectives. But we got to shout out all of our newest patrons: Alexander L, Tyler K, Margaret W. I feel like I might have shouted you out last week, but you get double shout outs if that's the case. Kelly P, Patty M, Kara S, and Turin the Cursed Patron. Welcome to all of you. I'm so glad you signed up. Thank you for supporting the show and keeping this going. I couldn't do it without all of you. I say this all the time, but it is absolutely true. Also, I'm going to shout out all of our VIP patrons, but first, we got this nice new review on Apple Podcasts. If you would like to help the show, leave a 5-star review on whatever platform you're listening to. And if you put some words in Apple Podcasts, I'll read those out on a future episode. Plus, you can comment on Spotify. You can join us on the Discord, all of that stuff. You know how that works. This one is from Fangorn Fan 54, who says, I'm obsessed with this pod. I am new to this podcast and have been a fan of The Lord of the Rings for a while. I always liked the movies, but then I started playing Magic the Gathering with the Tales of Middle-earth set and got sucked in, and now I'm reading the books. And I mean all of them. Currently, I'm 3 chapters from finishing the trilogy and plan to read the Silmarillion next, and this show has been helping me get through it and know more of the lore. I'm only 21 episodes in, so I have a lot to catch up on, but I'm excited to go along for this very much expected adventure. See what you did there. Thank you so much for that. That's awesome. All right, gotta shout out all of the VIP patrons. Let's see if I can get through the list. Fulcrum, David S., Daniel Nightweaver, Capenna, Richard J., TJT, AK Music Lover, Barney D., Azel Razzle, Blade of Andoril, Lori B., Norwegian Mayar, Mason Weathertop, I almost goofed on that one, Divine Madman, Rosie Rose, Huon is my hero, Aldarion is right, Averiel, Party Snacks, Artemis, Kira C., Das S., Silver Star, Silver Hobbit, and my name is August West, and now also Turin the Cursed Patron. Thank you so much. All right, I'm off to do the bonus episode. We're going to be talking about Pippin and his ancestry and the Took family and all of that. It is time to dig more into that stuff, and it's a little bit tricky to describe, but I'll do my best. Have a wonderful week. Stay safe out there, and I will see you next time. Thanks for listening to the Lord of the Rings Lorecast. If you'd like to learn more about other fantasy worlds, check out my other podcasts, The Elder Scrolls Lorecast, The Witcher Lorecast, and more at robotsradio.net. If you'd like to reach out, I'd love to hear from you. Send me a note on Twitter at robots_radio, or join our amazing community on the Robots Radio Discord. There are links in the show notes, or just search Robots Radio Discord, or find the link on robotsradio.net. I'll see you next time.